السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه أما بعد. First and foremost, we should all sincerely implore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and supplicate to Him for our brothers and sisters who are suffering in Gaza and other parts of the world. But more importantly, their suffering is an immediate one. As we are hearing, over 9,000 people have died. A great number of women and children. People are displaced without food, without water, without electricity, without treatment, medical treatment. And all that in a state of fear and instability. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant forgiveness and mercy and martyrdom to those who have died, and to grant cure and recovery to those who are injured, to grant patience to those who have lost loved ones. So this time is a time of great trial for the Ummah and for our nation. It is definitely without question that it is a great trial for the brothers and sisters who are currently suffering as we are sat here in peace and security. But actually, if we think about it with some insight and contemplate, then Rasulullah ﷺ said that the believers are all like one physical body. If part of that body experiences some pain, then the rest of the body responds with restlessness and with fever. And it's important for us to realize that anything that befalls any believer, we should be empathizing or feeling those same feelings. So sharing the feeling of loss and pain, because we are all one in terms of our faith and belief and worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But despite the trials and the tribulations and the difficulties and the suffering, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants for the believer to maintain hope. Because to lose hope in the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is a sign of great weakness in faith. And is actually an act of kufr. You know, ulama state that if a person commits a sin, no matter how great that sin is, if they then believe that Allah cannot forgive them, then that loss of hope is far greater than all of the sins that that person has committed. Because when you commit a sin, you acknowledge that Allah has commanded you to do otherwise. Maybe you're not doing something that is expected of you. Maybe you are doing something that you are expected to stay away from. But you acknowledge it as a believer, this is haram. Or you might be doing it out of ignorance. Whereas when you lose hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you are reducing Allah azza wa jal to a level that is not befitting to Allah. Because Allah says, وَرَحْمَتِي وَسِعَتْ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ. My mercy encompasses all things. And He says, عَالِمُ الْغَيْبِ وَالشَّهَادَةِ. His knowledge encompasses all things. فَعَالٌ لِمَا يُرِيدُ. He always does what He wills and what He wants. وَمَنْ أَصْدَقُ مِنَ اللَّهِ قِيلًا. There is none that is more truthful than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in fulfilling His promises. إِنَّ اللَّهَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. Allah has power over all things. لا يعجزه شيء في السماوات ولا في الأرض. Nothing overcomes Allah, nothing escapes Allah, nothing goes out of the control of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the heavens or the earth. So when you lose hope in Allah, you're reducing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from this great magnificent being and Lord and creator and provider and maintainer to a God that does not have those very qualities or attributes with which He describes Himself. So, how do we find hope? Hope is in Iman, because Iman is the combination of hope and fear. Khawf and raja. Fearing the consequences of our ill choices, ill actions. Fearing the consequences of our evil. That Allah has commanded and I have gone against the command of Allah. And so Allah can take me to task and punish me because I have transgressed despite revelation, despite the sending of prophets and messengers, despite the clear signs that I see, and despite my testimony of faith and my acknowledgement that He is Allah and that as His servant I am expected to obey His commandments, to stay away from His prohibitions. Right? So this is what we fear. Not that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would do any. Allah says, وَمَا رَبُّكَ بِظَلَّامٍ لِلْعَبِيدِ. When Allah speaks of punishment and how He will punish, and He will surely punish, what is being done to the people of Gaza and to any person who is facing injustice in the world? Because when it comes to injustice, Allah does not have two rules. There is only one rule, and it applies to both believers and non-believers. Whether that is the oppressor or the oppressed. Rasulullah said, اتقوا دعوة الظالم دعوة المظلوم. That protect yourself or be wary of the supplication of the oppressed, for there is no veil between that person and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah will fulfill and He will grant justice in this world or the next. So when we see the atrocities that are unveiling, and we feel pain and concern, pain and worry for the people who are under this injustice and oppression, the people who are hurting. We forget that the tyrants, the unjust and the oppressors, the punishment that is waiting for them with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot be described. Allah says, فَيَوْمَئِذٍ لَا يُعَذِّبُ عَذَابَهُ أَحَدٌ. On that day, none can punish like Allah does. Allah says, إِنَّ بَطْشَ رَبِّكَ لَشَدِيدٌ. we looked at the verses of Surah Al-Buruj. And so, because we don't have a lot of time, how do we maintain that hope? Iman within ourselves. To reaffirm what we believe in, despite what we see. And this is real belief. Because when what you see goes in accordance to what you believe in, then there is no, that belief is not praiseworthy, because it's factual and you can see it and sense it. This is why on the day of Qiyamah, everybody is a believer. Everyone is a believer. There is a statement of Rasulullah that Bilal will make adhan and everyone will confirm this, the calling of Muslim, non-Muslim, munafiq, does not matter. Everybody is a believer. Why? Because now they can see. They see the angels. They see the day of Qiyamah. They see hellfire. So now everyone believes. Allah Azza wa Jal says, لا ينفع نفسا إيمانها. On that day, your belief, if you had not believed before seeing, when things you could not perceive them, you could not sense them, if you did not believe in the ghaib, in the unseen, then your faith is of no use. Because on that day, even shaitan will acknowledge and accept. Fir'aun and Haman and Qarun and Namrud, all these great tyrants that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us of in the Quran. So, Iman, revisiting our Iman, and this is what we do in every salah. إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينَ. We worship you. The first worship is the worship of the heart. And as we always say, this dua after the adhan and morning and evening, رَضِيتُ بِاللَّهِ رَبَّا, I have accepted Allah as my Lord. Regardless of what He does, regardless of whether I understand the wisdom behind His decisions and His actions, I believe that Allah is my Lord. He is in control of my life. He created, He provides, He sustains. Benefit and harm is in the control of Allah Azza wa Jal. Difficulty and ease is in the control of Allah Azza wa Jal. This is why we say, Allahumma la sahla illa ma ja'altahu sahla. Ease will only come from Allah. Benefit only comes from Allah. Harm only comes from Allah. Pain only comes from Allah. Loss of life only comes from Allah. No one has the right to question Allah. He gave life, He takes life. There is no injustice done to anyone. No one is dealt a bad deck of cards. No one. Those who suffer in this world, they have greater retributions in the hereafter. That their suffering of this world will become completely insignificant and completely forgotten. We say, the hadith of Rasulullah, Allah will bring a believer on the day of Qiyamah who lived the most difficult circumstances a human being can ever live. Just a glimpse of paradise, a glimpse. Allah will summon this person and He will say, oh my servant, did you live through any hard time? He will say, no, I swear by you, Ya Allah, I have never known a hard time or a difficult day in my life. So a life of misery or a life of difficulty and pain and hardship goes to oblivion, completely erased from the memory, not by living a day in paradise, by a glimpse of paradise. And so reaffirming what we believe in. And we can only do that if we, and this is the second source of hope, is the Quran. Quran comes, the messenger comes bashiran wa nadhira. Quran is bashiran wa nadhira. It gives good news in order to give hope. And it gives warning in order to do what? To be just. Because if you're only given good hope, Allah is merciful, Allah is forgiving, paradise is this great place that you can go and fulfill all your desires, but you're not warned, then you have been done a great injustice. Because you were not informed of the other possibility. Allah is forgiving, but He's also very severe in His punishment. He's merciful, but He will take to task if He wishes to. And so this is where we take our hope from. And Iman is hope and fear. Hope in all of the promises of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the promise of Allah Azza wa Jal is that He can grant victory, and He will grant victory. Allah does not, ultimately, victory is for the believer. Honor is for the believer. Whether they achieve it in this world or not, that is up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whether they see it in their lifetime or not, that is up to Allah Azza wa Jal. Sumayya and Yasir and other Sahaba radiallahu anhum ajma'een who died prior to Hijrah and prior to the conquest of Mecca, they never saw the fruits of their efforts and their sacrifice. But did the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala come? It did. Was it fulfilled? It was fulfilled. So we should have no doubt and not allow shaitan to bring doubts into our minds and into our hearts about what Quran says, because Quran is the only reality and the only truth on the face of this earth. Everything else is falsehood. If it does not comply with Quran, anything that contradicts Quran, no matter how factual it may seem, it is what? Falsehood. This is why when Allah decides to destroy this world, Quran is removed from this world. Because Quran is the eternal truth that does not know an end. Even in our recitation, when you finish قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ, you start at Alif Lam Mim, Fatiha, Alif Lam Mim, Ali Imran, and you get to قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ, you immediately go back. Because Quran has no beginning and no end actually. It is the speech of Allah, just like Allah does not have a beginning, does not have an end. The meanings of the Quran and the depth of the Quran knows no bounds, no limits. But because Quran has come into this world, it has come in the physical form, in the letters that we read, in the pronunciations that we pronounce. And so reading Quran and translation of the Quran is important for the believer throughout their life, but especially in times like these, because it is going to be a source of hope, and it's going to give you insight and see realities that otherwise humanity cannot see. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, هو الذي بعث في الأمين رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب وإن كانوا من قبل لفي ضلال مبين. Before the advent of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and revelation of Quran, humanity was in clear error. They had intellect, they had knowledge, they had know-how, they had experience, they had sight and hearing and minds to think with. But Allah Azza wa Jal says they were in total misguidance. Meaning what they believed as realities of life were not realities. What Quran says is a reality and the truth, that is what we accept as a believer. And so to strengthen ourselves, we read verses, surahs of the Quran, we read translation of the Quran, and we affirm what Allah informs us of in the Quran, even if we are not able to fully understand and comprehend. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us understanding. Inshallah Azza wa Jal, we are going to make adhan and give a few minutes for sunnah. We ask all brothers, once adhan is made, please stand up, fill in the gaps. Jazakumullahu khairan.